Poor homeless girl stops jewelry thief and saved CEO's fortune. Kimberly Suttles stood in the middle of a room that looked too perfect to be real. The walls shimmered with soft gold light, and the smell of polished wood filled the air. In front of her sat Albert Randall, the powerful CEO of Randall Luxury Jewelers, staring at 3 drawings spread across his desk. Each face on the paper belonged to a dangerous criminal. Albert's voice was quiet, almost disbelieving. How did a homeless child just save my entire fortune? The 12-year-old girl, with dark caramel skin, tangled hair, and shoes held together by tape, kept her eyes on him. Her hands were still trembling from sketching every detail she had seen that morning. She didn't want credit. She just wanted someone to listen. On the desk beside the drawings lay tonight's event list, the charity gala where millions in rare jewels would be displayed. Kimberly's warning had exposed an inside traitor, and her photographic memory was the only thing standing between Albert and disaster. But how did a 12-year-old girl living on the streets end up in the office of one of the city's most powerful men? And would anyone believe her in time? Before we go back to where it all began, welcome to our channel. If you love powerful stories of courage and kindness, hit that subscribe button and tell us where you're watching from in the comments. Tomorrow, we're dropping another incredible story you won't want to miss. Your support helps us bring more stories like this one. Now, let's see how Kimberly's morning changed everything. The morning sun had not yet reached the tall buildings of Fifth Avenue when 12-year-old Kimberly Suttles opened her eyes. She had slept beneath the awning of a closed bakery, using a flattened cardboard box as her bed. The faint smell of baked bread still lingered in the air from the day before. It was the only comfort she had. Kimberly sat up slowly, brushing crumbs from her worn jacket. The street was still quiet. Delivery trucks hummed in the distance, and the cold air nipped at her skin. She moved carefully so she wouldn't draw attention. Everything she owned was inside her small backpack: 2 shirts, 1 pair of socks, and an old photograph of her grandmother. 8 months had passed since her grandmother's death. They had lived in a small apartment before everything fell apart. Rent notices kept coming, bills piled up, and soon the apartment was gone. With no family left, the streets became her home. Life had taught her how to survive, how to stay unnoticed, and how to remember everything. Kimberly's mind could capture every detail: the face of a kind vendor, the color of a passing car, the sound of a closing door. Her teachers once called it a photographic memory. Now, it was her way to stay alive. She stood and folded the cardboard neatly, sliding it behind the dumpster where no one would find it. Then she pulled out half a piece of bread wrapped in a napkin. It was her breakfast and her lunch. She chewed slowly, watching the city wake up. Vendors began lifting metal shutters. Coffee shops turned on their lights. The sidewalks filled with the steady rhythm of hurried footsteps. Across the street stood the one place that always caught her attention: Randall Luxury Jewelers. The building looked like it belonged in another world. Large windows stretched from floor to ceiling, reflecting the morning light. Inside, crystal chandeliers sparkled above rows of glass cases filled with gold and gemstones. Kimberly often stopped to look from across the street, drawn to the beauty and the warmth that seemed to glow from within. She had never been inside, but she liked to watch. It reminded her that beauty still existed, even if she couldn't touch it. As she finished her bread, something unusual caught her eye. Near the side entrance of the jewelry store, 3 men stood close together, partly hidden by a delivery truck. They wore uniforms that looked almost like the store's security team: dark blue shirts, matching caps, but something was off. Their clothes were too new, too stiff, and their movements didn't match the calm professional guards she often saw. Kimberly frowned, watching them carefully. One of the men kept checking his watch. Another glanced around too often, as if waiting for someone. The third man pulled out a phone and spoke in a low voice. Kimberly couldn't hear much over the traffic, but a few words drifted across the street. Tonight, during the gala. Cartwright collection. She'll disable the cameras at 9. Her heart started pounding. She didn't understand everything, but she knew enough. Something bad was going to happen. The gala must mean the big event she'd seen advertised on posters outside the store, Randall Jewelers' annual charity night. The Cartwright collection was the company's most famous display, worth millions. And the part about she'll disable the cameras made her stomach twist. Someone inside was helping them. Kimberly ducked behind a bench, pretending to tie her shoe as she watched the men separate. One walked toward the alley, another down the block, and the third blended into the morning crowd. She memorized every detail: the scar above one man's left eyebrow, the dragon tattoo curling up another's neck, and a shiny silver watch on the wrist of the third. Her mind locked them in place like photographs she could never erase. For a moment, she sat frozen, her heart racing. She had information that could stop a crime. But who would believe her? She was just a homeless girl in torn clothes. People usually avoided her eyes or told her to move along. The police had ignored her before, and security guards often chased her away from store entrances. She looked across the street again. Through the window, employees moved gracefully inside the jewelry store, arranging cases and polishing glass. Everything looked calm and perfect. But Kimberly knew the calm wouldn't last. She pressed her hand against her backpack, feeling the rough texture of the fabric beneath her fingers. A thought pushed through her fear. If she stayed silent and something terrible happened, she'd never forgive herself. Her grandmother had always told her, doing what's right is harder when no one sees you, but that's when it matters most. Kimberly took a deep breath. The air stung her throat, but it cleared her mind. She couldn't walk away. Not this time. She waited until the men were gone, then stepped out from behind the bench. The morning crowd had thickened, people rushing to work, heads down, not noticing the small girl crossing the street. Her heart pounded harder with every step. She stopped at the edge of the sidewalk, staring at the shining glass doors of Randall Luxury Jewelers. Her reflection looked back at her, thin, tired, and small. Her hair was tangled, her shoes patched with tape, and her jacket hung loose around her shoulders. For a second, doubt flooded her chest. What if they laughed at her? What if they called security to throw her out? She glanced up at the elegant logo above the door, the name Randall written in silver letters. She thought of the men's voices, the word tonight, and the millions of dollars that could vanish. Her photographic memory replayed the conversation, clear and sharp. She had no proof, but she had the truth. She clenched her hands into fists, whispering to herself, "You have to try." With one last deep breath, Kimberly stepped toward the door. The glass shimmered, and for a brief moment, she saw herself surrounded by reflections of diamonds and light. She didn't know that this single step would change her life forever. The world moved around her, unaware that a 12-year-old girl with nothing to her name was about to stop one of the biggest jewelry heists in the city's history. Kimberly waited at the edge of the curb, her heart pounding as traffic rushed by. Every part of her wanted to turn back, to disappear into the alleys she knew so well. But her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind, "Do what's right, even when no one's watching." She took a step forward, dodging between cars until she reached the opposite sidewalk. The glass doors of Randall Luxury Jewelers loomed in front of her, gleaming under the morning light. For a moment, she stared at her reflection. The girl staring back didn't look brave. Her oversized jacket hung off her small frame, her hair tangled, her shoes patched with gray tape. She looked nothing like the people who entered this place every day. Her throat tightened. She almost turned away. Just then, the door swung open. A tall man in a charcoal gray suit stepped out, phone pressed to his ear. His expression was focused, his tone clipped and professional. Yes, make sure the Cartwright collection display is triple-checked. I don't want any delays tonight. Kimberly froze. She recognized him immediately. She had seen his picture in the newspaper once. Albert Randall, the man whose name was written in silver above the doors. Albert ended his call and looked up. For a second, he almost walked past her. She looked like so many others he passed daily on this street, lost, tired, asking for nothing. But something made him stop. Maybe it was the determined look in her eyes, or how she didn't step back in fear when he glanced at her. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice even but not unkind. Kimberly swallowed hard. "Sir," she said softly, "I need to tell you something important. I think someone's going to rob you tonight." Albert blinked, caught off guard. "What?" She looked down at her taped shoes, then back up at him. "I heard them talking, 3 men. Near your service entrance this morning. They said something about the gala, and the cameras being turned off at 9. Albert frowned. He had heard all kinds of strange claims over the years, people asking for money, or pretending to know something valuable. But this girl's voice didn't sound like a trick. She sounded scared, but certain. Still, the practical part of his mind spoke first. "She's a child. A homeless one. It's probably nothing." But something else, something deeper, told him to listen. He exhaled slowly, slipping his phone into his pocket. "All right," he said quietly. "Come inside. Let's talk." Kimberly hesitated. "Inside." "It's all right," Albert said, holding the door open. "You're safe." The moment she stepped in, her breath caught. The air smelled of perfume and polished wood. Bright chandeliers hung from the ceiling, scattering light across glass cases filled with diamonds, gold, and gemstones that sparkled like stars. She had seen them only through the window before. Up close, they looked almost unreal. Several employees turned to look. Their polite smiles faded when they saw her clothes. A woman behind the counter whispered something to another clerk. Kimberly felt her face grow warm. She wanted to shrink into the floor, but Albert's calm voice broke through the whispers. "Can you find Marcus for me?" he said to one of the staff members. "Tell him to come to my office immediately." The employee hesitated, then nodded and hurried off. Albert gestured for Kimberly to follow him. She trailed behind, staring wide-eyed at the displays and glittering cases until they reached a large glass-walled office. "Sit down," Albert said gently, pointing to a chair across from his desk. Kimberly sat carefully, her backpack clutched in her lap. She looked nervous, ready to be told to leave at any moment. Albert leaned against his desk, arms crossed. "Tell me exactly what you heard." So she did. Every word, every detail, the men's uniforms, their anxious glances, their quiet conversation about tonight and the Cartwright collection. She described the scar above one man's left eyebrow, the dragon tattoo on another's neck, and the shiny silver watch on the third man's wrist. As she spoke, Albert noticed how precise her descriptions were. Not one pause, not one uncertain word. It was like she could still see them standing there. A knock came at the door, and a broad-shouldered man stepped in. "You called, sir." "Marcus," Albert said, "this young lady has something you need to hear." Marcus, head of security for Randall Jewelers, looked at Kimberly skeptically, but listened. She repeated her story. As she listed the details again, Marcus's confident expression shifted. His jaw tightened, and the color drained from his face. "Sir," he said carefully, "those descriptions, they match 3 men we've been tracking for months. Professional thieves. They've hit jewelry stores in 3 different cities. Albert straightened. You're certain? Marcus nodded. Down to the tattoo. The room went quiet. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioner. Albert's eyes went to Kimberly. She looked small in the big chair, but there was a quiet strength in her gaze. So, Albert said slowly, they're planning to strike tonight. And someone on the inside is helping them. Marcus gave a grim nod. That's what it sounds like. Albert turned back to Kimberly. You said you saw their faces clearly? Yes, sir. Would you recognize them again if you saw them? She nodded. I don't forget faces. Marcus leaned forward. Can you describe them to a sketch artist? Kimberly thought for a moment, then shook her head. I can do better. I can draw them myself. Albert's eyebrows lifted slightly. You can draw? Yes, sir. I used to draw all the time. I remember exactly what they look like. For the first time, Albert smiled faintly. All right then, Kimberly. Let's see what you can do. He called for paper and pencils, and within minutes, supplies were placed on the desk. As Kimberly picked up the pencil, her hands stopped trembling. The fear faded, replaced by focus. She had spent months surviving by remembering details. Now, that same skill might save something far bigger than herself. Albert and Marcus exchanged a glance. Neither spoke. They just watched as the quiet girl in torn clothes began to draw with the calm confidence of someone who knew exactly what she'd seen. Kimberly sat at Albert Randall's wide mahogany desk, a clean sheet of paper before her and a sharpened pencil in hand. The pencil felt almost strange, light and fragile compared to the rough scraps of paper she sometimes drew on behind the bakery. Albert stood nearby with Marcus, his security chief, both men watching quietly as the small girl leaned forward, focused and steady. The room was silent except for the faint scratching of pencil on paper. Kimberly's movements were quick, precise, confident. Her hand didn't tremble anymore. Her mind replayed the scene from that morning with perfect clarity. The faint scar above the first man's brow, the tattoo curling up the second man's neck, the sharp angle of the third's jawline. Every feature reappeared on the page as if she were tracing them from a photograph only she could see. Albert's assistant entered the office to bring coffee, but stopped in the doorway. Others soon gathered quietly, drawn by curiosity. None of them spoke. They just watched this thin, homeless girl, her face half hidden behind her hair, bring 3 faces to life with an accuracy that didn't seem possible. After 20 minutes, the first portrait was done. Kimberly pushed the paper forward, and Marcus leaned in to look. His eyes widened. That's one of them, he said, his voice low. That's Adrian Holt. He's a professional thief, been on our watch list for years. Albert said nothing. He simply watched as Kimberly reached for the second sheet. Her focus never wavered. Lines formed, shading deepened, and within minutes another face emerged, the man with the dragon tattoo. That's Diego Larez, Marcus said, shaking his head in disbelief. No question. She's drawn him exactly. Same tattoo, same build. The room grew heavier with each passing minute. By the time Kimberly began the third portrait, no one dared move. Albert noticed the way her small hands held the pencil, steady, careful, purposeful. She wasn't guessing. She was remembering. Finally, she placed the last sheet on the desk and sat back, quietly exhaling. That's all of them, she said softly. Marcus picked up the last page. Trevor Nash, he murmured. The silver watch gave him away. They're all connected. Sir, this is unbelievable. Albert looked at the drawings, then at Kimberly. The 3 faces stared back at him from the paper, men who had planned to destroy what he had built. But the reason he would still have his company, his reputation, and his legacy by tonight, was sitting right in front of him, in a frayed jacket and patched shoes. He cleared his throat, struggling to find the right words. "What's your name?" "Kimberly Suttles, sir." Albert nodded slowly, still looking at her with disbelief and quiet respect. "Kimberly," he said, his voice softer now, "you just saved me from losing everything." She blinked, unsure how to respond. "I didn't mean to cause trouble. I just wanted to help." He smiled faintly. "Help? You did far more than that." Marcus was already on the phone, alerting law enforcement. His tone was sharp and focused as he explained the situation. Kimberly sat still, watching, not quite understanding the scale of what she had done. Albert turned back to her. "Kimberly," he said, "I don't even know how to thank you. Is there anything you want? Food? Money? Clothes?" She hesitated, her small hands folded in her lap. "I don't need a reward," she said after a moment. "I just wanted to help. I know what it feels like when people take things from you that you can't get back." Albert's chest tightened at her words. He could hear the weight behind them, the kind of loss money couldn't fix. He walked around the desk and crouched beside her, lowering himself until they were at eye level. "You'll never sleep on the streets again," he said firmly. "Not after today." Kimberly's eyes widened. "Sir." He reached for the phone on his desk and called his assistant. "Carla, get me the manager at the Central Hotel. I need a room prepared immediately, something comfortable. And send someone to bring food, new clothes, and anything else a young girl might need." The staff exchanged surprised glances, but no one questioned him. When Albert ended the call, he turned back to Kimberly. "You're going to stay there tonight, all right? It's safe. You'll have a bed, a warm meal, and clean clothes." Her lips parted, but no sound came out. For months, no one had looked at her with kindness, only suspicion or pity. Now this man, this stranger, was offering her comfort she hadn't felt since her grandmother was alive. Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. She wiped them quickly with the back of her hand, embarrassed. "Thank you, sir," she whispered. Albert smiled gently. "You don't have to thank me. You've already done more for me than you know." Marcus finished his call and nodded toward Albert. "The police are setting up surveillance for tonight's gala. We'll have undercover officers in the crowd. If there's an inside contact, we'll catch them in the act." "Good," Albert said. "Make sure every camera is checked, every entry secured. I don't want them slipping through any cracks." He turned to Kimberly again. "You'll stay at the hotel tonight, where it's safe. After the gala, we'll talk about something more permanent. You deserve better than the streets." Kimberly looked down at her hands, still stained with pencil dust. "Are you sure?" she asked softly. "You don't even know me." Albert's expression softened. "I know enough. You're brave, honest, and you did the right thing when no one else would. That's all I need to know." Carla appeared at the door moments later, ready to take Kimberly to the car waiting outside. The staff, who had watched her draw in silence, now smiled shyly as she passed. Some even whispered words of encouragement. When Kimberly reached the door, she turned back to Albert. "You're really going to catch them, right?" He nodded. "Yes, we will. Thanks to you." For the first time in months, Kimberly smiled, a small hopeful smile that reached her eyes. As she followed the assistant out, Albert stood by the window, watching her go. He felt something shift inside him, a quiet realization that this day had changed more than his company's fate. Somewhere between her trembling courage and her honest eyes, he had remembered what truly mattered. As the elevator doors closed behind her, Albert whispered to himself, "After tonight, we'll make sure she never has to be invisible again." Marcus stepped closer. "She's special, isn't she?" Albert nodded slowly. "She is. And I intend to protect her, just like she protected me." Outside, the city moved on as if nothing had changed. But inside Randall Luxury Jewelers, a plan was already forming, a trap that would end the crime before it began, all because one brave child refused to look away. Evening swept across the city in a slow golden fade. From the window of his penthouse, Albert Randall adjusted the cufflinks on his tuxedo and watched the skyline shimmer under the last light of day. The gala was less than 2 hours away. Normally, nights like this were his domain. Charming investors, dazzling clients, presenting his newest collections with confidence. But tonight felt different. Every movement carried a quiet awareness that something dangerous had been set in motion. He paused at the mirror, straightening his bow tie, and saw not just the reflection of a jeweler, but of a man who had been reminded what trust looked like. All day, his thoughts had returned to Kimberly, the small, sharp-eyed girl who had appeared from nowhere and changed everything. He wondered if she had eaten, if she was comfortable, if she could finally sleep without fear. He had made a promise to her, and he meant to keep it. At the hotel across town, Kimberly stood in the middle of her room, wrapped in a white robe that felt too soft to be real. Steam still clung to her skin from the first hot bath she'd had in 8 months. The scent of soap and shampoo filled the air, so different from the cold scent of rain and cardboard she was used to. On the table sat a tray with more food than she'd eaten in days: chicken, mashed potatoes, and a tall glass of milk. She ate slowly at first, almost cautiously, as if someone might walk in and take it away. When she finished, she touched the smooth bedspread and hesitated before lying down. The sheets were cool and clean. Her body sank into the mattress, and a small laugh escaped her lips, one of disbelief more than joy. For the first time in a long while, she felt safe. But safety, she knew, could vanish in a blink. Her mind replayed Albert's words, "After tonight, we'll figure out something more permanent." A promise like that was powerful, but she'd learned not to count on promises. Still, she closed her eyes and whispered into the quiet room, "Please let him be okay." Back at Randall Luxury Jewelers, the final preparations for the gala were underway. The showroom sparkled under soft golden light. Every glass display case gleamed, each jewel catching and reflecting the brightness around it. The centerpiece was the Cartwright collection, a rare assembly of diamonds, emeralds, and sapphires worth more than most people would earn in a lifetime. Uniformed staff moved gracefully, checking displays and adjusting details under Marcus's sharp supervision. But among them were also men and women who weren't on the official payroll, undercover officers strategically placed as servers, guests, and security staff. The coordination had been tight and deliberate, built on Kimberly's information. Marcus stood in a quiet corner near the security station, headset clipped to his ear. He briefed his team one last time. "We've got 3 external suspects confirmed," he said evenly. "They'll try to make contact with someone inside. We don't know who that person is yet, but when they move, we'll be ready." At precisely 7 o'clock, the first guests began arriving. Luxury cars lined Fifth Avenue as photographers snapped flashes of light across designer gowns and tailored suits. Laughter and chatter filled the air, but beneath the polished surface, the tension ran quiet and sharp. Albert greeted guests with his usual grace, smiling, shaking hands, and accepting congratulations on the success of his latest designs. No one looking at him would have guessed he was waiting for criminals to strike. Every so often, his eyes flicked toward Marcus across the room, a silent check-in between them. "Beautiful event, Mr. Randall," one investor said. "Thank you," Albert replied warmly. "It means a lot that you're here tonight." But his mind wasn't on the compliments or the music. It was on the security feeds running in a small room behind the main hall. Marcus and two officers monitored the screens, cycling through camera angles that covered every entrance and corridor. The Cartwright collection sparkled beneath its protective glass like a galaxy of light, and for a moment, Albert allowed himself to look at it not as a jeweler, but as a man. These jewels had taken him a lifetime to gather, symbols of beauty, history, and craftsmanship. Yet none of it compared to what he'd seen in Kimberly's courage. As the evening went on, conversations and toasts flowed freely. A string quartet played softly near the staircase. Servers moved with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Everything appeared flawless. But under the elegance, everyone on the security team knew one thing: the thieves would strike before the night ended. At 8:30, Marcus checked in through Albert's earpiece. All clear for now. No sign of interference. Albert exhaled quietly. Keep watching the service corridors, he murmured back. They'll need a clean route in or out. Marcus nodded from the security room, his eyes flicking between monitors. His instincts told him it was close. He could feel the shift, the way one of the guards moved a little too fast past a door, or how a staff member lingered too long near the camera panel. At 8:45, a light blinked on one of the screens. Movement in the restricted hallway near the security controls. Wait, Marcus said into the mic, his tone dropping. We've got activity. Albert stiffened slightly, his smile never fading as he continued speaking with a donor. Talk to me, he murmured under his breath. Marcus leaned closer to the monitor. A figure in a staff uniform had just entered the camera room, alone, moving with quiet purpose. The uniform was correct, the badge authentic, but Marcus knew his team inside out. He'd never seen this person before. They're accessing the security system, Marcus said quickly. Not one of ours. Albert's pulse quickened. He lifted his champagne glass, hiding the earpiece from view. Stand by, Marcus continued. We're moving in now. The music continued to play. Guests laughed and chatted, oblivious to the quiet tension threading through the air. Albert nodded politely to a couple approaching him, his expression calm, composed. But inside, he knew this was the moment everything had led to, the line between danger and triumph drawn by the courage of a child who refused to walk away. He turned slightly toward the grand staircase, eyes flicking once toward the hallway beyond. The night was far from over, and somewhere in that glittering crowd, the truth was about to surface. Marcus's voice came through the earpiece, firm and low. Confirmed. Someone's trying to disable the system. A pause. Mr. Randall, stand by. We're moving. The security room's quiet hum was the only sound until Marcus leaned closer to the monitor. The face that appeared on the screen made his blood run cold. Mr. Randall, he said into the earpiece, barely above a whisper. It's Victoria Chun. Albert froze mid-step, the polite smile on his face stiffening. He turned his head slightly, his voice low. Repeat that. Marcus's tone was steady but heavy. Victoria. She just entered the security room alone. She's disabling the cameras. For a moment, Albert couldn't move. Victoria Chun had been by his side for 6 years. She'd started as his assistant and climbed her way to director of operations, smart, loyal, reliable. She was the one who organized every gala, managed every inventory, and handled every private client. If there was anyone he trusted completely, it was her. He swallowed hard, fighting the disbelief rising in his chest. On the screen, Victoria methodically tapped into the system, her expression calm. At exactly 9 p.m., she entered a command that shut down 3 key security cameras, just as Kimberly had overheard. Get me a visual on the service entrance, Marcus ordered quickly. Another monitor flickered to life. 3 men approached from the alley, each wearing uniforms nearly identical to Randall's delivery staff. They moved with precision, using copied keys to unlock the service door. The door clicked open. They were inside. Albert's grip tightened around the champagne glass in his hand. His heart hammered, but he stayed outwardly composed. "Marcus," he said softly, "keep eyes on them. Don't move until they're in position. I want all of them caught." "Yes, sir." In the security room, officers shifted into position, watching the monitors. The 3 intruders moved swiftly through the corridor, their voices low. One carried a tool case, another a duffel bag. They communicated through tiny earpieces, the same channel Victoria was tuned into. She sat at the desk, expression blank, as she spoke quietly into her mic. "They're clear. Move to the main hall. Collection case is 20 meters ahead." Her voice was steady, mechanical, as if she had done this 100 times before. Albert's chest ached. He couldn't understand how someone who had shared birthdays, late-night deadlines, and company victories could stand there betraying him so calmly. In the main hall, the thieves reached the edge of the gala, blending in with the staff serving drinks and clearing trays. They moved closer to the centerpiece, the Cartwright collection, its glass case glowing under soft light. Marcus's voice filled Albert's ear again. "They're in position. Stand by." Albert shifted slightly, raising his glass once more to mask his lips. "Do it," he said quietly. The moment came fast. One thief bent to fake a shoe tie while the other 2 slipped gloved hands beneath the edge of the display's frame. Their movements were quick, rehearsed. The leader whispered through his mic, "We're on 3-1-2. Now." Marcus's voice cut through the air like a blade. Officers in plain clothes moved at once, closing in from every corner. Guests gasped as men in suits and women in elegant dresses suddenly drew badges and firearms. The thieves froze, realizing too late that the trap had been waiting for them all along. In the security room, Victoria's fingers hovered above the control panel as the monitors came back online one by one. She flinched when the door burst open. 2 officers entered, guns raised. "Victoria Chun, step away from the console." She didn't resist. She simply straightened her posture and let them cuff her wrists. "It was worth a try," she said flatly. Downstairs, Albert moved through the stunned crowd, his calm breaking at last. He reached the corridor just as they escorted Victoria from the security room. Her eyes met his, unflinching. "Why?" he asked quietly, the question trembling in the air. "I trusted you. I gave you everything." Her tone was almost casual. "You gave me a salary. They offered me millions." There was no remorse in her voice, only a cold practicality that twisted something inside him. "They would have taken everything," Albert said softly. She shrugged. "You'll rebuild. People like you always do." The officers led her away, her heels echoing against the floor. Albert stood motionless as she disappeared down the hall, the reality of betrayal settling heavy in his chest. In the main hall, Marcus oversaw the capture of the 3 men. Their weapons were confiscated, their communication devices seized. As officers identified them, Marcus relayed the names to Albert. Confirmed. Vincent Rowe, Malik DaCosta, and Troy Keller. All wanted in connection with high-end heists across the state. Albert exhaled shakily, every ounce of tension leaving his body at once. "And Victoria?" he asked quietly. "She coordinated it all. Her access made it possible." Albert nodded slowly, staring at the now-secured Cartwright collection. Every jewel was still in place, untouched. Kimberly's sketches had saved it all. As the guests were ushered out safely and the police took over the scene, Albert stood alone by the display case. The light reflecting off the diamonds felt different now, no longer a symbol of luxury, but of something fragile. Trust, once broken, could never be restored the same way. Marcus approached quietly. "She'll face a long sentence. The evidence is solid." Albert nodded, but didn't speak for a while. Finally, he said, "At least it's over. And thanks to that girl, it didn't end in ruin." He turned toward the door, the exhaustion finally hitting him. "I want to check on Kimberly first thing in the morning." As he walked out into the night, flashes from police lights reflected in the glass around him. For all he had lost that evening, one truth gave him strength. Kindness from a child who had nothing had just saved everything he built. The next morning, chaos reigned outside Randall Luxury Jewelers. Reporters crowded the entrance, cameras flashing as journalists shouted questions over one another. "Mr. Randall, is it true a homeless girl saved your entire collection? How did she know about the break-in?" Microphones swarmed as if they could catch a miracle in sound. The headlines were already everywhere: CEO's fortune saved by homeless child. Inside the building, Albert stood behind a podium, looking more tired than triumphant. The press conference had been called not to celebrate his brand, but to acknowledge the one person who had saved it. "I've run this company for 20 years, Albert began, his voice steady but carrying emotion. "I've worked with hundreds of people, trusted many. But last night, the person who showed the greatest courage and integrity wasn't an executive or a guard. It was a 12-year-old girl who had nothing to gain." Gasps rippled through the room. "She saw something wrong and chose to speak up," he continued. "Kimberly didn't just save my collection. She reminded me that integrity doesn't come from wealth or status. It comes from the heart." He paused, letting the words settle before adding softly, "A 12-year-old girl showed more integrity than people I've known for years." The applause that followed wasn't polite, it was heartfelt. By evening, news outlets across the country had picked up the story. Social media overflowed with praise. Hashtags trended globally, #Courage of Kimberly, #Hope in Humanity. Donations flooded in to a temporary trust fund set up in her name. People sent clothes, books, handwritten letters. Some offered scholarships. Others offered jobs to help children like her. Meanwhile, Kimberly sat quietly in a modest hotel room provided by social services, wrapped in a blanket far too big for her small frame. The night's chaos still played in her mind: the flashing lights, the police, the noise. For the first time in years, she wasn't cold or hungry. Yet she couldn't shake the fear that all of this would disappear as quickly as it appeared. A soft knock came at the door. When she opened it, Albert stood there, holding a tray with pancakes, fruit, and orange juice. "You brought breakfast?" she asked, blinking in surprise. He smiled gently. "You've had enough of cold meals, don't you think?" She hesitated, then stepped aside to let him in. He set the tray down and pulled up a chair across from her. The silence between them wasn't awkward, it was fragile, like a thread neither wanted to break. After a few bites, Kimberly finally asked the question that had been haunting her. "What happens to me now?" Albert took a breath, his expression soft but deliberate. "That depends on what you want, Kimberly. I'd like to help you properly this time. Not just with food or clothes. I want to make sure you're safe, educated, cared for. Would you let me?" Her fork froze midair. "You mean, live with you?" "If you'd be comfortable with that. I'll talk to social services, make it official. No rush. Just think about it." Her eyes darted down to her lap. People say things like that all the time. They mean it for a while, then they don't. Albert's heart broke at the quiet truth in her voice. "You're right," he said gently. "But I'm not people. I'm me. And I don't make promises I can't keep." That conversation set in motion a process far more complicated than either expected. Lawyers became involved. Social services began home studies and background checks. Every part of Albert's life was scrutinized, from his work schedule to his mental readiness to raise a child. Through it all, Kimberly kept her distance emotionally, afraid of hoping too much. Each time Albert visited her, bringing books or snacks, she smiled but kept her guard up. Hope had betrayed her too many times before. Weeks passed. Albert remained patient, never pushing, always showing up. When she mentioned she liked art, he brought sketch pads and pencils. When she mentioned missing the stars, he arranged for a small telescope near her window. Gradually, her walls began to lower. The day of the guardianship hearing arrived like the final chapter of a long storm. The courtroom felt enormous, its silence pressing down. Kimberly sat beside Albert, fidgeting with the hem of her sleeve. The judge, a kind-eyed woman with silver hair, reviewed the case file carefully before speaking. "Miss Smith, do you understand what's happening today?" Kimberly nodded nervously. "Yes, ma'am. Mr. Randall wants to be my guardian." "And how do you feel about that?" Her voice trembled. "He's been kind to me. He didn't have to be. He makes me feel safe." Albert turned his head slightly, eyes glistening. The judge looked at him next. "Mr. Randall, are you prepared for the responsibilities that come with this guardianship? Children need more than protection. They need consistency, love, and presence." "I understand completely," Albert replied. "I may not have experience as a parent, but I'll learn. I'll be there for her every day, for school, for life, for everything she needs. She saved my world. The least I can do is give her a home." The judge smiled softly. After a brief pause, she signed the order. "Mr. Randall, she's now in your care." For a moment, neither of them moved. Kimberly's eyes widened as the words sank in. Albert's breath hitched, and before he could speak, she threw her arms around him, clutching his jacket tightly. Tears streamed freely down both their faces, tears of relief, of disbelief, of something deeper neither could name. In that moment, it wasn't about wealth, or news headlines, or even gratitude. It was about two people, one who had lost everything, and one who thought he had everything, finding home in each other. Albert whispered through his tears, "You're safe now, Kimberly. I promise you're home." She nodded against his shoulder, her voice barely a whisper. "Thank you, Dad." 3 months had passed since the court granted Albert guardianship of Kimberly. The rhythm of their new life together was still taking shape, but their home was no longer the quiet, echoing space it used to be. Laughter now drifted through the hallways. Light footsteps ran down marble floors, and a warmth had replaced the sterile calm that once defined the Randall mansion. Kimberly's room had become a reflection of her spirit, a blend of imagination and comfort. The walls were painted a soft sky blue with hand-drawn constellations above her bed. Shelves overflowed with books, sketchpads, and small clay figures she'd molded during art therapy. A small corkboard displayed her latest school achievements, each certificate carefully pinned by Albert himself. She had her own desk, her own clothes neatly folded in drawers, and for the first time in her life, her own key to a room that was truly hers. Her mornings began with the smell of fresh pancakes and the sound of Albert calling from the kitchen, "5 more minutes or I'm eating your share." She would rush down in her new school uniform, hair still damp from her shower, her backpack slung over one shoulder. They always ate breakfast together, no phones, no distractions, just conversation. "How was your math test yesterday?" Albert would ask, pouring syrup. "Easy," she'd reply confidently. I remembered all the formulas. Her photographic memory had become her secret strength. At her new private school, she quickly rose to the top of her class. Teachers were amazed by her ability to recall entire chapters after one reading. But more than her intellect, what impressed them most was her humility. When praised, she simply said, "Mr. Randall helps me study." Albert attended every parent-teacher conference, sitting proudly in the front row. He clapped at her art exhibition, took photos at her school concert, and never missed a chance to tell her how proud he was. Each event, each small milestone, drew them closer, two people learning how to be family. Yet beneath her bright smiles, remnants of her old life sometimes surfaced. Some nights, Albert would find her awake long past midnight, trembling from nightmares. In those moments, she wasn't the confident honor student, she was the frightened child from the streets again. She'd whisper through tears, "They told me no one would ever want me." Albert would kneel beside her bed, his voice calm and certain. "They were wrong. You're wanted, Kimberly. You're safe." He found her a therapist who specialized in childhood trauma, and week after week, she opened up a little more. Healing came slowly but consistently, built on his patience, his steady presence, and the unspoken love that filled every space between them. One evening, after dinner, Kimberly sat at the kitchen table working on her science project. Albert leaned over, helping her label the parts of a model solar system. "Hand me the Saturn ring," she said distractedly. He chuckled. "It's called the Ring of Saturn. Grammar, young lady." Okay, she laughed. "Thanks, Dad." The word slipped out before she realized it. Her hand froze midair, eyes widening. The silence that followed was heavy but tender. Albert blinked, caught off guard. "What did you just call me?" Kimberly's face turned crimson. I didn't mean to. She stopped, biting her lip as tears filled her eyes. "Can I call you that? I mean, if you want." Albert's throat tightened. He knelt beside her chair, eyes soft and full. "Kimberly," he said quietly, "I'd be honored." She dropped into his arms, sobbing against his shoulder. That night marked a turning point. It wasn't about titles anymore, it was about belonging. Meanwhile, justice was unfolding elsewhere. In a high-security courtroom downtown, Victoria Chen and the three men who had plotted the theft faced sentencing. The evidence, the footage, the recordings, the stolen jewels recovered, left little room for defense. Albert stood in court to testify, not out of vengeance, but duty. When the judge asked if he wished to address the defendants, he said simply, "I forgive you." But forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. Trust, once broken, takes a lifetime to rebuild, and sometimes it never returns. Victoria met his gaze for a fleeting second. There was no defiance left, only quiet regret. The judge sentenced her and the others to long prison terms. As Albert left the courtroom, reporters asked for his comment. His reply was calm. "Justice isn't about revenge. It's about closure. Now we move forward." And move forward he did. Inspired by Kimberly's courage and her own words, "I just wanted to help," Albert launched a new initiative, Kimberly's Hope Foundation. Its mission was simple: to provide housing, education, and art therapy for homeless children. "Art saved Kimberly's spirit," Albert said at the launch event. "Now, we'll use it to heal others." But the idea for the foundation's focus came directly from her. One evening, while they were sketching together, Kimberly looked up and said, "There are so many kids like me out there, sleeping under bridges or in shelters. Maybe we can help them too, give them a place to draw, to dream." "Can we, Dad?" Albert smiled. "Not can we will." Within months, the foundation opened its first community art center, a bright, welcoming space filled with easels, paint, and laughter. Kimberly became its youngest ambassador, sharing her story at schools and charity galas. She stood on stages, no longer timid, but confident, using her past to light the path for others. "I was scared once," she told a crowded hall of donors. "I thought I didn't matter. But someone believed in me. Now I want every kid to know they matter too." Her words drew standing ovations. Children who once lived on the streets began attending programs, sketching their dreams on paper just like she once had. Some found homes. Some went back to school. Every success story added fuel to the foundation's mission. At home, Albert often found her sitting by her window late at night, sketching city skylines or writing down ideas for new projects. "Can I show you something tomorrow?" she'd say, eyes shining with purpose. He'd nod, smiling. "Of course, sweetheart." Kimberly's Hope Foundation grew quickly, but more than that, it became a symbol of rebirth, not just for her, but for Albert too. She had given him something his wealth never could: meaning. Every time she laughed, every time she called him Dad, every time a child from the foundation smiled, Albert was reminded that the greatest treasures in life aren't displayed in glass cases. They live in the hearts of those we choose to love. The morning sun poured through the tall glass windows of Randall Luxury Jewelers, lighting up every jewel like a burst of fire. The grand lobby, once a place of quiet commerce, now buzzed with excitement. Reporters, photographers, and city leaders filled the space, their eyes fixed on the new centerpiece draped in white silk, the renamed Kimberly collection. 1 year had passed since that unforgettable night. The same store that nearly became the scene of a devastating theft was now hosting a celebration of courage and transformation. Kimberly stood beside Albert at the podium, her shoulders straight, her smile steady. She wore a soft blue dress, simple but elegant, and a silver bracelet engraved with her initials, KS. Her eyes sparkled with the same confidence that had once startled a CEO into listening to a child who refused to be ignored. Albert watched her with quiet pride. She was no longer the trembling girl who'd stood in his office a year ago. She was 13 now, mature, articulate, and full of life. Every word she spoke carried the strength of someone who had survived and learned to believe again. As the crowd hushed, Albert stepped forward to speak first. "A year ago," he began, "I almost lost everything, not just my company, but my faith in people. And then, a child walked into my office and reminded me what honesty, bravery, and compassion look like." He turned toward her with a smile that only a father could give. "Kimberly didn't just save my fortune. She saved me from becoming someone who forgot what truly matters." Today, this collection doesn't bear the name of a designer or a brand. It bears the name of a girl who reminded us that doing the right thing is still priceless. Applause filled the room. Cameras flashed. Kimberly took a deep breath, stepped up to the microphone, and began her speech. "A year ago," she said softly, her voice carrying across the crowd, "I had nothing but the clothes on my back and a choice, to stay silent or speak up. I'm so glad I spoke up." Her eyes searched the crowd, city leaders, news crews, children from shelters, and donors from across the country. "Kindness costs nothing," she continued, "but it can change everything. It changed my life. And now, through Kimberly's Hope Foundation, we're changing other lives too." The audience rose to their feet, clapping and cheering. Some wiped away tears. It wasn't just a celebration, it was a living reminder that courage and kindness could rewrite destinies. As the applause settled, Albert revealed the next part of the event. He gestured toward the veiled display. "Today we officially unveil the Kimberly Collection, a symbol of trust, hope, and second chances." He pulled away the silk cover, revealing a stunning arrangement of jewelry, sapphires, emeralds, and diamonds, each piece representing a different virtue. But what drew the most attention were 3 framed sketches placed at the center, Kimberly's original drawings from that night. The portraits that had saved his company. The crowd gasped, murmuring in admiration. "These," Albert said, his voice thick with emotion, "are the drawings that changed everything. I will never forget the moment I realized that a 12-year-old girl had just saved a lifetime of work, with nothing but her courage and her talent." Beside the display stood Marcus, the head of security, wearing a crisp suit. Albert called him to the stage and presented him with a plaque. "For loyalty, integrity, and bravery, thank you, Marcus." The crowd applauded again, and Marcus nodded humbly. The event continued with laughter, camera flashes, and heartfelt conversations. Representatives from Kimberly's Hope Foundation spoke about the dozens of children now housed, fed, and educated through its programs. Formerly homeless teens shared how the foundation had given them a second chance. One young boy held up a drawing and said proudly, "Kimberly taught me to believe in myself." Albert stood back for a moment, watching it all unfold. His company was thriving, but more importantly, his life had meaning beyond business. He thought of the man he used to be, calculating, distant, focused only on profits. Now, he measured success in smiles, not sales. When the ceremony ended and the guests began to leave, Albert found Kimberly standing quietly near the jewelry cases, staring at her old drawings. "Do you remember what you said," he asked softly, "when I asked how I could repay you?" Kimberly turned to him, smiling faintly. "I said I just wanted to help." He nodded. "You did more than help. You taught me that real wealth isn't in these cases. It's in moments like this." She looked up at him with teary eyes. "And you taught me that family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's someone who chooses to love you." Albert's heart swelled with emotion. He placed a hand on her shoulder, then drew her into a hug. For a long moment, neither spoke. The applause and chatter from earlier had faded, leaving only the quiet hum of the display lights. 2 people, once strangers from different worlds, now bound by something stronger than circumstance. Later that evening, as they drove home through the glowing city streets, the atmosphere inside the car was peaceful. Kimberly rested her head against the window, watching the familiar landmarks glide by. When they passed the old bakery awning where she once slept, she grew quiet. Albert noticed her gaze. "You okay?" he asked gently. She smiled, her reflection shining softly against the glass. "Yeah, Dad. I'm more than okay. I'm home." He reached across the seat and took her hand. The silver bracelet on his wrist, engraved courage and kindness, KS, caught the city lights, glinting faintly between them. For Albert, it was a reminder of how far they had come. For Kimberly, it was proof that even the smallest voice could change the world. The car continued through the night, 2 lives intertwined by one act of bravery, one choice to care, forever bound by courage and by kindness. Kimberly's courage to speak up, even when no one believed she mattered, saved more than a fortune. It built a family and sparked a legacy of hope that continues to grow. Her story is proof that one brave act, one moment of kindness, can change everything. The smallest voices can carry the biggest truths, and sometimes all it takes is choosing to care when it would be easier to walk away. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the stories that inspire and remind us of the good still left in this world. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and share your own stories of kindness. We'd love to hear them. Tomorrow, we're bringing you another unforgettable story that will warm your heart and challenge the way you see compassion. Your likes, shares, and subscriptions help us keep creating meaningful stories that reach people everywhere. Just like Kimberly showed us, you're never too small to make a big difference. Until next time, choose courage, choose hope, and above all, choose kindness.